Greetings and welcome to week 6 and 7 of our Mapping Our World course. Joseph Kursky here, your instructor. Week 6 and 7 are combined into 2 weeks around this important theme of symbolization. Maps are representations of reality. They are not reality, but representations of it. Very useful representations, and hopefully through this course you'll find that they're also very fun and interesting representations of reality. We want to understand reality, spatial reality. Remember, the end goal is to understand our world and everything in it in a better, richer, deeper way so that we can make wiser decisions about our world and plan for a more resilient, sustainable, healthier, happier future. That's the whole point of mapping. You want to represent the world in maps, 2D and 3D maps. So that's why we want to look at patterns, relationships, and trends in our physical world and in our natural world, and also in our social world, things that we construct as humans. So we map things. You may have done this as a kid. You're sketching with your finger in the dirt. Okay, here's our house, and here's the ravine across the street, and over here, we cross the footbridge. At this point, you might get a stick, and the ravine that you've drawn with your finger that ends up being a tiny little canyon in the dirt, you put a little stick across that. Okay, there's the footbridge. So you're basically representing a larger part of your neighborhood with a smaller map, which is basically probably a square meter or less in the dirt in the backyard of your house, for example. The stick represents the footbridge. The little canyon you drew in the dirt with your finger represents the ravine. In both cases, you're representing something much larger in reality than your little sketch in the dirt. The same is true with other kinds of maps, printed, digital, and others. What you're doing is a couple of things. Number one, you're representing something that's bigger. It may be just a wetland or the ravine or something, or it may be your region or your watershed or your ecoregion or your city or your state or your world. But it's something larger in reality than your sketch or your 2D or 3D map. That's one thing. You can't draw, in a digital mode or in printed, you can't draw the world at 1-to-1 scale. There's an old joke about doing that. If I had a map at 1-to-1 scale, I'd spend the rest of my life folding it, right? Because it would be the size of the earth. So you've got to reduce things in scale, and that's why we spend a lot of time in our course talking about map scale. Large scale maps show a lot of detail, not very much area, like a neighborhood or a ravine or a watershed. A small scale map of an ecoregion or a biome or a country or a hemisphere or the whole world for that matter is a small scale map. So whatever scale you're working with, it's still not 1-to-1 unless you drew your office with a huge piece of paper. That would be a way for you to draw it 1-to-1. But the point is, you're always reducing the scale. So you want to represent things with symbols. And that's why these 2 weeks, we talk about symbolization. You want to represent things with symbols. A house symbol, a vehicle symbol, a symbol for a river, a symbol for a police station, a symbol for a tree, a symbol for water quality measures, median age, wind farms. I mean, you're going to represent things with symbols. Now, the way that you choose your symbols, the way that you size them, the way that you color them, the way that you choose the colors for your maps. Let's say you've got land use and you've got pasture and woodland, wetland. How are you going to represent those? With hatch patterns, diagonal lines, with colors, with tints, with an object, a point symbol? There's all kinds of choices that you as a cartographer make when you're making maps. And the reason why this all matters is not so much what I've talked about so far, that we need to represent the world. Sure, okay, Joseph, I get that. But also remember that maps are powerful means of communication. And so the way that you symbolize, and then in future weeks, we're going to talk about classification and simplification, but the way that you symbolize in these 2 weeks, your maps affects your end user's perception of whatever you're mapping. With great opportunity comes great responsibility. In other words, you've got a lot of data and mapping tools at your fingertips, as I hope you're understanding in this course. And with all of that capability, it's amazing, isn't it, what you can do with these web-based mapping tools powered by geographic information systems. But doing that, you have a lot of you should have a lot of care, you should take a lot of care in designing your maps in the way that they can be understood clearly. That is the whole purpose of mapping, right? Is to communicate an issue, a problem, something in our world or in our community or anything in between. So symbology is actually really important, and that's why we're going to spend some time talking about how to choose symbols on maps, the colors, the in later weeks, the classification of those colors, choosing visual variables in this week. We're also going to talk a little bit about what is map balance. How do you balance insets in your maps and titles, or the legend, the scale bar, all those elements that go into most maps that you see. Not all, but many maps that you see. And how do you balance all those? And we're going to talk a little bit about what constitutes a visually appealing map and a not so visually appealing map. So you can make a map that looks really pretty awful and doesn't communicate very well. But my goal in this course is to help you think about maps in a strategic way, but also in, so a way that you can actually plan to make good maps, but also when you're consuming large amounts of maps. I mean, maps are one of the most popular things on the web and in daily communication. When you're consuming these maps, you'll say to yourself, this doesn't communicate all that clearly. Now, I remember, since I'm a big hiker, like probably many of you are, many times in the past, I'll be at a state park or even a national park, but most of all state parks and even some county parks. Sometimes the maps are not all that clear. They may be like a big white sheet of paper if they're printed and a couple of trails on there. And I remember one time in a park right after I taught a workshop at the University of West Virginia, I had a couple of hours, out in the field. So I'm at this state park, and there was a few minutes where this is pretty rare for me as a geographer, but for a few minutes I popped out of the woods and I was in a clearing, and that clearing had a couple of buildings on it, so I knew it was a fairly prominent location in the park. And it took me a few minutes before I oriented the map, and I knew, okay, there's the picnic ground, there is the road, and there's that trail, and this must be where I am on the map. It took me a few minutes, and the reason why I'm so, I remember that so clearly is because usually and not everybody in mapping and geography is this way, but I'm usually pretty spatially oriented. I have other issues with remembering people's names and stuff like that. But in terms of mapping and spatial, orientation, I'm pretty good. But the point is, it was kind of a cool thing for me because I could not, for a few glorious minutes, I was like, I don't exactly know where I am on this map. But in part because that map was so Spartan, it was so sparse with features. And so I want you to get thinking about how do you choose how much detail to show, what colors to show, how to classify data, and so on your maps. Very important as we seek to communicate the things in our world and everything in it, and also to communicate the value of what we're mapping to others. So I hope you have fun with this module. I think it'll be interesting for you as you dig into some of these hands-on mapping tools. I make all kinds of maps, that's all I do. And if you saw my maps, you'd like them too. Okay, I digress, but let's map on. See you in the course.